Hello and welcome. Tried a little something different with the intro today, so hopefully people like the music. Let me know in the chat what you thought. Feels like I like that splash screen for the moment before I come on. Maybe I'll work on that. I got the thumbs up from the wife. Okay, that's good. Hey, fractals, thank you. All right, I'm gonna take these off. Um, all right. So let's start off here with a little bit of information about the stream while everyone gets settled. So each week we pick a new national park to explore together. This week we're exploring Gates of the Arctic National Park. For those of you with a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, Flying Singer, I see that you're trying to get in there too. Hopefully I can see you here. Kind of pan around a little bit. Um, but if you have Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, you should be able to fly alongside today. So I'll be in the US West server, USA West server, and Fractals just posted up the link to the flight plan. If you don't have the game, you still want to follow along, there's another way to do it with the flight tracker, and that'll show kind of where on the map I am. So it's the exact same thing that I used to do this iPad trick where I show where I am within the United States. You get that same information just through a web browser. Zoom out a little bit here. We got a huge park today. Speaking of the park, so I've researched the park in preparation and added any new information with sources to the National Park Wikipedia page. Why Wikipedia? So there's two main reasons. It's a way to make sure the facts are checked by others, and it's a way to give back to a living body of knowledge, something that'll go beyond our hour here together. So to that end, if you notice anything incorrect or that should be clarified, please help fix the Wikipedia pages. As the wiki community often says, be bold and make the changes. Also, we'll vote near the end on the next national park to explore together. So, oh, thank you. Got the heads up from the wife that I wasn't looking at anything interesting. Well, I mean, I guess the map's kind of interesting. Thank you, wife. So those of you who were at the first couple live streams remember when I'd have it up for like 15 minutes without noticing. So this is a much better system. Anyway, at the end we'll post a poll for which park we'd like to explore next week. So keep an eye out for that. Also, if you have questions or thoughts or ideas as we're flying around, feel free to post them in the chat. I'll try and check over relatively frequently and make sure I'm seeing what's going on. Small disclaimer, yes, I am a pilot, but we'll be taking full advantage of the simulator, so please don't try any of this at home. So without further ado, I'm Jules Altus, and I'll be your pilot for this evening. So sit back, relax, and let's explore Gates of the Arctic National Park. Fractals, you want to throw up that first poll here? While that's going on, I'll get myself situated. So we've got actually quite a bit of a flight ahead of us. I picked a very fast plane, and Flying Singer has an even faster plane. And we should be able to cover the whole distance, but we'll kind of play it by ear as we get going. So this is a large part of Alaska. Gates of the Arctic National Park is the size of Belgium, larger than Belgium. So this is part of the reason that it's a lot going on here. I also changed our Have You Ever Been Here today because the park is one of the least visited parks. I think the least visited park. I have this in my show notes later. And so it's statistically unlikely that anyone's been up there, but I changed a little bit to have you heard of it or have you not heard of it before? All right, let's get ourselves going for a takeoff here. See how my plane's feeling today. Okay, good. So we've got, this is a Beechcraft King Air 350i. That's a twin turboprop engine. So I got two different engines going here, and they're both turboprops, which means I can get quite a bit of speed, and I don't lose that speed when I get up at higher altitudes. Part of the reason I wanted this particular plane. All right. I don't know if you'd see a Beechcraft King Air in this area. This is more of a Piper Cub sort of flight area, but we'll use our imagination. It's a fun plane to fly. All right, I'll keep climbing here. It's because Belgium's tiny. The fractals. So yeah, Belgium is a little small. That's fair. Although when you say it like it's a huge country, then it has a little bit more grandeur to it, you know. So our first part of this flight will just be getting into the park. We're going to kind of start on the west side and then we'll cut back in. So destination Walker Lake. All right, so I'll be finicking with a couple things in the plane to try and get us stabilized here and still moving along well. This is a little bit more touchy plane than I normally go with. All right, so Gates of the Arctic. The purpose of Gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve is to preserve the vast, wild, undeveloped character and environmental integrity of Alaska's Brooks Range, it's the mountain range, and to provide opportunities for wilderness recreation and traditional subsistence use. So it's all about the Brooks Mountain Range, which is this sort of, well, actually it's the mountains that we're seeing right out our right window here, and kind of all along there. This is all part of the Brooks Mountain Range. And so we'll be flying mostly in that area. Okay, trimming up my plane. That's what I'm doing wrong. Okay. I wasn't able to find a friendly park ranger overview. I really did look. This park has, with having fewer visitors, it also has fewer resources floating around. So the good news is that it's such a large park that a lot of the landforms and kind of the feel of the park you can actually get just from flying around it. So we'll actually get a pretty good taste of it today. So a little bit of background information then. It is Gates of the Arctic National Park. Is an American national park that protects portions of the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. The park is the northernmost national park in the United States, and it is situated entirely north of the Arctic Circle. Interesting fun fact for you, I had thought about this park as something we could do in one of the longest days of the year back in December, and realized that if we did it, then it would just be totally dark the entire time. Like I would have to set the days forward a couple of months to get any kind of sunlight. So getting that same sort of cool effect of being so far north just in what we're seeing here. All right, straw poll results. Okay, so not yet, but I'd heard of it before this week for 2, and not yet, and who knew there was a park there for 1 vote? And then no one has been up there yet. So I guess it sort of depends. I didn't know about it before I started prepping for the live stream. Like, I didn't know about it until a couple months ago. I knew there was a lot of parks in Alaska, but this one in particular I hadn't heard of. So like I mentioned, it's the park's entirely north of the Arctic Circle, and then it's the second largest, slightly larger in the area of Belgium at 8.4 million acres. It's a huge national park. It's not the largest, though. The largest park is also in Alaska. We'll visit that in a future trip. Gates of the Arctic was initially designated as a national monument in 1978 before being redesignated as a national park and preserve upon passage of the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act in 1980. So the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act comes up because it created a lot of national parks in Alaska. A large part of the park has additional protection as the Gates of the Arctic Wilderness, which covers 7.2 million acres. So the park itself is 8.4. Of that, 7.2 million acres is the wilderness. The wilderness area joins the Noatak Wilderness, and they form the largest contiguous wilderness in the United States when put together. Can you see Russia from the plane? Keep an eye on that. Yeah. I can't see Russia from this height. Could definitely fly over there, though. Actually, we'll talk our first topic, a little bit of a spoiler, but our first topic today will be about caribou. And I was looking into kind of caribou and how far they can swim and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of theories that rely on the fact that caribou could probably have swam from Russia or swam from Alaska over. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, but no, Pickle 760, no seeing Russia today at least. Okay, so person of the week, I wanted to pick someone who was meaningful to this park. There was a couple that I was going between. One of them was Jimmy Carter, who actually passed that Alaska, the act that made this national park, and it has an interesting story around it, but I think that's a good one for another day. The reason is there's this guy, Bob Marshall. Bob Marshall looks like this. Okay, kind of a little photo. Get a kind of sense of who he is. But more commonly, you would have seen him with his backpack on, where he looks like that. So there's Bob Marshall. And so Bob Marshall was one of the first to explore much of the Brooks Range. especially the headwaters of the northern fork of the Koyukuk River, which he bestowed and where he bestowed the gates of the Arctic name on a pair of mountains, the Borel Mountain and the Frigid Crags. I'll actually show you on the map real quick where those are. So we're going to visit them a little bit later in the live stream, but you can see where we're flying now. And if I zoom in up here, there's those two mountains that they mentioned, and he called those the gates of the Arctic. So when we fly through them, you'll see kind of why he called them the gates. But he passed through that and gave it the name. So then Bob Marshall, he was born in 1901 and lived till 1939, so he was 38 when he died. Was an American forester, writer, and wilderness activist who is best remembered as the person who spearheaded the 1935 founding of the Wilderness Society of the United States. Marshall developed a love for the outdoors as a young child. He was an avid hiker and climber. Oops. Thank you. Appreciate that. As a wife gave me a heads up. He was an avid hiker and climber who visited the Adirondack Mountains frequently during his youth. The Adirondack Mountains over in New York. He also traveled to the Brooks Range of the far northern Alaska wilderness. He wrote numerous articles and books about his travels, including the best-selling 1933 book Arctic Village. Surprised old Bob Marshall didn't have a beard. It's funny, Fractals, I had the exact same thought. Here, I'll pull up that photo again. Like, it feels... I don't know, he just feels like a guy who would really rock a beard. Oh, anyway. We'll send him a note. We can let him know that that's something to consider. So he defined wilderness as a social as well as environmental ideal, and promoted organization of a national group dedicated to the preservation of that kind of land. In 1935, he was one of the principal founders of the Wilderness Society and personally provided the society's funding in its first years. So he came into wealth when he was younger. He inherited a bunch, I believe. He also supported socialism and civil liberties throughout his life. Let me see. So the biggest reason I wanted to mention him, though, is the fact that the conjoined wilderness of this national park and the nearby wilderness is the largest contiguous open area of wilderness. And Bob Marshall was a big part of the reason why that sort of thing happened. So today, Marshall's considered largely responsible for the wilderness preservation movement, like I was saying. Several areas and landmarks, including the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana and the Mount Marshall in the Adirondacks, have been named in his honor. Okay, Flying Singer, I don't see you. I think I have my setting turned on. Let me see, actually. Not unheard of that I would have this off. Let's see. Oh, I think I got it. Anyway, hopefully I'll see it floating around here. Let me pop out of the plane real quick and do a little scan around the Brooks Mountain Range. So this is the area that Bob Marshall was hiking in and where he kind of said this is something that we should really hold on to. This is something pretty neat. That, and it's freaking cold because it'd be crazy to live out there. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, the beard's a very practical part of that too. All right, so let me trim up this plane just a little bit. Fractals, you want to post our first topic poll here? So our first topic, like I mentioned, is caribou and reindeer. Talk about an animal today. So what are we talking about? You may already know what this looks like, but just to level set, this would be a caribou or a reindeer. We'll talk about the difference between a caribou and a reindeer in just a moment. And I'll let people work on that poll for just a second. Okay, so what happens to the velvet covering of caribou's antlers? Is it that it sheds off with the New Year's antlers when the New Year's antlers have finished growing? So is it that it sheds off every year? Or it continues to grow through the caribou's life, eventually forming an iconic Portland-style beard? Not like Bob Marshall had. Big beard. Or is it an optical illusion and there actually isn't any velvet? It just looks like velvet on top of the antlers. I'm gonna pull this picture back up so you can see. Let's give people a second there. One of the ones... This park is really interesting in that there's actually a lot of cool pictures and images, but the a lot of them come from commercial industries, and so they're not public domain. And I try to use all public domain or at least Creative Commons work for this live stream. So what I was able to find that was a pretty good video that shows the size of the antlers as well as the caribou migrating in these ginormous herds. So I'll play this real quick just so a little bit more background on kind of the caribou animal. There isn't any sound, so I'll kind of talk over it. The reindeer, also known as a caribou in North America, is a species of deer with circumpolar distribution, native to Arctic, subarctic, tundra, boreal, and mountainous regions of northern Europe, Siberia, and North America. This includes both sedentary and migratory populations. Reindeer herd size varies greatly in different geographic regions. The Arctic people have depended on caribou for food, clothing, and shelter. Hunting wild reindeer and herding of semi-domestic reindeer are important to several Arctic and subarctic peoples. They use them for meat, hides, antlers, milk, transportation. The Sami people have also depended on reindeer herding and fishing for centuries and use reindeer to pull a type of Nordic sled. So you can see in the video there's the kind of migration going on. You'll see they're standing on top of the snow. I'll play this one more time because it's kind of cool. So I'll point out, you'll see that antler size is one part of it, which is enormous. They also have antlers. I'll talk a little bit about this, but there's one set of antlers kind of up and back, and then another cluster of antlers up in the front. So that's really common. It's two. So male and female reindeer grow antlers annually, although the proportion of females that grow antlers varies greatly between population and season. The antlers are typically larger on males. Oh, let's see this. Another tidbit as a reminder that the traditional Christmas legend, Santa Claus reindeer pull a sleigh through the night sky to help Santa deliver gifts to good children on Christmas Eve. So, out of curiosity, has anyone seen a caribou in real life? Seen a caribou or a reindeer up close? Especially one with like the big old antlers. This is one, as I was researching this, I realized I had not previously seen. I don't think I've seen one in real life, although I feel like I must have at some point. But I'd be curious if anyone's come across them. They seem like they must be kind of like moose, just really incredibly muscular kind of animals to encounter. All right, straw poll results. Sheds off a new year. Yep, sheds it off for one vote. Okay, or it continues to grow through the the caribou's life for one vote, resulting in that Portland style beard. Okay, or it's an optical illusion and there's no velvet for one vote. So, oh, interesting. And straw poll doesn't do well with the apostrophes. It's good to know. So, yes, in Oregon. Oh, that's funny. Was it in Portland? Maybe it wasn't a caribou at all. Just kidding. So the kind of answer to that poll though is they do shed the antlers off every year. So I kind of mentioned that a moment ago, but that's something they will they'll regrow them. At least the males do every year. Okay, let me get myself down here. So reindeer versus caribou. Easy to confuse, but officially, a reindeer is the European name for the species, while in North America, it's known as a caribou. So it is the exact same animal, exact same species. There's different types within that group, but for all intents and purposes, reindeer and a caribou are the same animal. So this is something that confused me coming into this, and I hope that also helps others. No difference, they're just different names. Let's see. There's one thing to know is because of the importance to a lot of different cultures, there's a lot of different names that you'll catch for different subspecies, and so you'll hear them called different things by different areas, but caribou and reindeer in general is the same sort of animal. We talked about those antlers. Like I mentioned, both populations grow antlers, and the reindeer is the only sort of like a deer species, so like a moose or a deer, you might like a white-tailed deer, that you would see where the females also grow antlers. There's a considerable variation between the subspecies, so different types of reindeer, different types of caribou. And so you'll get some that are kind of small and spindly looking antlers, and sometimes they're more big and showy sort of antlers. But on average, a bull reindeer's antlers are the second largest of any existent bear, after the moose. So it's second largest set of antlers after the moose. You can measure, and the size of that is about 39 inches to about 53 inches in width. So a little over 3 feet to a little over 4 feet across the view. You can also measure antler size, the number of points, and you can get information about it like the nutritional status, the climate variation, the environment. So you can learn a lot from their antlers. And because they shed them every year, this becomes a very useful piece of information to have lying around. Okay. So as the antlers grow, I mentioned that they shed. They actually get covered in, this is the moment that they're growing, right? So they regrow every year. And the way that they do that is they get covered in this thick velvet, and that velvet is filled with blood vessels and is kind of spongy in texture. So we'll pull back up. We'll actually have a photo of it down here. That velvet then covers the growing antlers in a highly vascularized skin. So this is, it's giving the antlers a lot of nutrition to grow, but it's really kind of this spongy sort of thing. All right, here we're coming up onto Walker Lake, so I'm gonna pop with a plane. We can look around here. So this is Walker Lake. This is supposed to be a really good place for putting in a canoe if you want to go canoeing in this area. Our next stop here, you can see off in the distance, is Mount Igapek. And this is the tallest mountain in the Brooks Mountain Range within the national park. So there's a taller one in the park, but this is kind of the highest point that we'll go to. I'll pull up a picture of this real quick while we're flying over. So this is that view. If there's one thing I've learned, it's Alaska in the summertime looks incredible. The winter, maybe not so much, but to each their own, I suppose. My wife knows I'm not a fan of the cold. Okay, so that's that one, and I'll pull up the Mount Igapek. So, like I mentioned, the antlers then have this sort of velvet that grows over them, and when it's fully grown, the velvet is shed or rubbed off. So this is sort of what that looks like. You can kind of see, it looks a little weird when you see it like that, but it really is this, it's just a kind of furry skin that provides the nutrients to allow the antler to grow. That's what that velvet is. When the antler growth is fully grown and hardened, the velvet is shed or rub off, like I mentioned. To the Inuit, for whom the caribou is a culturally important keystone species, the months are named after the landmarks of the caribou life cycle. For example, there's a month in the Igloolik region, meaning when velvet falls off caribou antlers. It's one way that you might be able to keep track of what time of the year it is based on the migratory patterns. Bring this just a little bit forward in time. Okay, and drop some of the snow. We can get that summer look going. Alaska's beach body. Okay. So then in late autumn or early winter, male reindeer lose their antlers and grow a new pair the next summer with a larger rack than the previous year. So every year the size of the antlers gets bigger. Female reindeer, however, keep their antlers until they calf. When bull reindeer, so this is something interesting about the social makeup of the reindeer, how reindeer of different genders interact with each other. So when the bull reindeer shed their antlers in early to midwinter, the antlered females acquire the highest rank in the feeding hierarchy, and so they gain access to the best forage areas. So while the male antlers have the largest, reindeer have the largest antlers, then they sort of get to dictate pecking order and who's going to eat first. And then in the critical time when it would be important for the females to have more food, the males have already lost their antlers, and so they've lost that status in the hierarchy, and they get access to better food. Yeah, Grandma got run over, doesn't quote. Grandma got run over by a caribou. Although, Fractals, I would giggle if you sang that next time that song comes up. Beautiful, yeah. Yeah, Sailor Guy, it's really pretty. Honestly, the whole area is really pretty. And so I think this was the title image I used actually for the flight plan. You'll also notice kind of in the valley, we talked about rivers in the Gateway Arch, not Gates of the Arctic, but Gateway Arch National Park. So there's an oxbow lake right there, and you'll see the rivers meandering and carving out their floodplain all over the place. So it's really, really prevalent around here. I'm above and behind you are pretty low for incoming. Yeah. Flying Singer, yeah. Yeah, I am really low for incoming mountains. Let's see, I don't know why. Maybe that's on my side. Um, anyway, so yeah, I'm very low. That's actually why I do that disclaimer, is because I wouldn't want anyone to watch this and think, oh, okay, great, I'll fly like right along a mountain ridge. Not the way to do it. Oh, gear up. Thank you. I knew something felt laggy. Okay. Thank you, Flying Singer. Okay. Well, that'll also pick up the speed here quite a bit. Okay. Okay, Caribou. So we have the social hierarchy. Antlers, size of the antlers determines who's going to eat first. Females keep their antlers longer. They eat first for that part of the year. Kind of a cool system. So winter survival. They also live in these really cold Arctic tundra kind of areas. And so they have a couple of cool adaptations to survive there. One of them is their hair. Another is the blood circulation. And then finally, we'll talk about their noses. There's a couple others beyond that, but these are kind of the really interesting ones. So for the hair, the coat has 2 layers of fur, a dense woolly undercoat, and then a longer haired overcoat consisting of hollow, air-filled hairs. So the hairs up close are kind of, they look like just little tubes almost, like little straws. I'm looking at my altitude, make sure I'm going to actually clear these mountains. So some caribou then can swim high out of the water because, unlike any other mammal, they have that air-filled quill-like hair. And so that kind of gives them a sort of life jacket. So if you see pictures of caribou or reindeer, it always looks like they're kind of more buoyant than you'd expect for how big they are. So that's because of the air in their hair. So it's partially for warmth and then partially for this sort of flotation piece. Another trick that they have up their sleeve for the winter is the concurrent heat exchange. This is to do with the blood circulation that they use. In particular, blood leaving the core of the body as it's going to the legs is going to be warmer than the blood that's coming on its way back in. So as it goes out to the legs, it's going to cool down because it's kind of an extremity, and then as it comes back in, it's kind of cold. What the caribou do is they have the blood vessels that are carrying that blood really closely next to each other. So the incoming and the outgoing blood pass each other. And what that means is that the blood, as it leaves the core, warms up the blood that's colder and coming back in. And so the heart doesn't have to work as hard because it doesn't have to heat and metabolize as much to keep the body temperature up. Instead, what it can do is as that blood is passing, the colder blood coming in warms it up, and then it's already sort of warm by the time it gets back in. So it saves a lot of pressure on the heart and a lot of energy for the caribou to then be able to use other places. All right, here we are doing a rapid climb up the mountains here. So we'll pass by Mount Igikpek. Today I learned my dog. Today I learned my dog has a similar coat to caribou. That's pretty funny. Does your dog have a like kind of hollow hair? Maybe it floats. Okay. So this is Mount Igikpek, and you'll see in the game that it's got some pretty cool jagged edges here. I'll flip over and I'll show you a picture of what it looks like in the real world. Okay. So I just passed by that part. So that's sort of what it looks like. It's got these really sharp, jagged edges to it, and that's the mountains all over this area look just like that. That was probably one of the things I wish that they had done a little differently for the game. Is I don't know how they would even capture that sort of jagged edge, but it's really pretty cool. All right, up next we're going to one of the famous climbing spots within the park. Yeah, and a double coat. Double coat on the dog. I'm trying to remember my dog growing up. I think it was... I remember brushing the coat every year to get rid of the winter coat, but I don't remember if it was double coated or not. Anyway. Don't crash. Yeah. Mad Wisman girl. Yeah, I will avoid crashing, and also, yeah, it's pretty cool. The whole area is actually really neat. So. All right, so Caribou, we have hair. We have the air pockets in the hair. We have this heat exchange system that they have, which is pretty advanced, and I kind of wish I had something similar. I'm not gonna lie. The noses on the reindeer then can also control the temperature gradient of air coming in. So you have this cold air on the outside, and they can actually change the temperature of it as it comes in based on like by using the way their nose is designed. And so what this means is a couple of things, but they can warm incoming cold air by the body heat before it enters the lungs. So it spends some time in this kind of path, and then it's warm enough to enter the lungs without being just a shock of cold air. And the other piece is that the water, if the air is very dry, water condensed from their breathing will also get picked up by their noses and kind of gets a little bit more moisture into the air that they're breathing in. This is kind of double system. They can heat the air up as it enters their nose, and they can also breathe in a way that it's going to add some more moisture back in. Again, another trick I wish I had. Spending a number of years in some pretty cold places. All these seem pretty good. So that's kind of their adaptations for Arctic survival. As far as mating goes, they mate in late September, from late September to early November, and a gestation period of about 230 days or so. During the mating season, males battle for access to females. Two males will lock each other's antlers together and try to push each other away. The most dominant males collect as many as 15 to 20 females to mate with. Collect is the word I particularly like, but that's fine. Male will stop eating during this time, and they lose much of their body reserves. And kind of as you might imagine, but also it is worth noting that the caribou with the largest antlers mate with the most females, typically. So, migration, one of the biggest things that stands out about caribou is their large migratory patterns. So they're known to have the largest terrestrial migrations on the planet. The individuals in this area migrate about, in this specific park that we're flying around, migrate about 2,700 miles per year. They normally travel about 12 to 34 miles a day and can run at speeds of 37 to 50 miles per hour. So very fast, very far. So a young caribou can already outrun an Olympic sprinter when they're only a day old. Caribou harem. I think it is called a Splasher 6. I'm pretty sure it's a caribou harem. I was looking it up, and honestly, I didn't dig into it too much. But yeah, I think you're correct. I think that's the name for it. Yeah, fractals. There's so many good jokes that I'm just not going to go for. But I'll leave it there. Okay, so predators. So they're fast, right? But they do have a number of predators. Including people is kind of a common, overhunting by people is a common problem. The golden eagle will prey on calves and are a prolific hunter in the calving ground. So this is one problem they run into. They also have to deal with gray wolves, who are their most effective natural predator. And they often find that, or they'll sometimes find that wolf packs or individual grizzly bears will actually follow around a herd of reindeer all year long and just kind of keep picking at the herd over and over, which seems like the worst traveling companion ever. They also have to deal with blood-sucking insects, such as mosquitoes, black flies, botflies, deer botflies, and these kind of insects are a plague to reindeer during the summer and can cause enough stress to inhibit feeding and calving behaviors. An adult reindeer will lose perhaps 1 liter, about 2 pints of blood, to biting insects for every week it spends in the tundra. So 1 liter for every week it spends in the tundra. All right, I'm gonna do a couple of quick turns here. So we're gonna go into the Ariditech peaks. I feel like my pronunciation on these ones might be off, so I'm gonna do a little in cockpit flying here. Okay, so what I'm doing is basically doing a 360 to actually turn back in, and we're gonna fly up the Ariditech peaks where you would actually go. Whoa, that's a pretty steep turn. For your pilot's test, you have to do what's called a steep turn, a 45-degree turn. And then they teach you all sorts of reasons why you don't want to do a 90-degree turn. Okay, so here we go. So this is sort of a basin, and this particular area is has been a landmark of inland Eskimo of northern Alaska And the word itself, Origitech, means fingers of the hand extended. So let me pop out here and we can kind of see, as we fly up, you'll see kind of why it's called that. Using all these tricks to get the plane down, which you could not do. Well, I guess you could do it, but you'd probably damage your plane, especially if it's a nice plane. All right, let me pull up what this looks like real quick while we're getting close. Holy mean mosquitoes. Yeah, very much so. I'm particularly not a big fan of mosquitoes. Okay, so I'll pause here real quick. So this is a very famous climbing area within the park. This is what it looks like in real life. So you get kind of that sense. And there's actually a lot of glaciers around each of these different peaks. There's kind of a glacier that forms, and so there's a lot of cool things to explore within this area. There's a big camp just behind me too. So, all right, keep ourselves flying here. Now we see if we can get that engine humming again. Okay, so like I mentioned, they can lose that pint of blood every week. Tormenting insects keep caribou on the move, searching for windy areas like hilltops, and mountain ridges, rock reefs, lake shores, forest openings, that sort of thing, or snow patches. They offer respite from the buzzing horde. They'll also gather in large herds to kind of block insects. So it's not that it reduces the number of insects, but it makes it less likely that any given caribou is going to get bitten. Let's see if I can pivot myself around here. Change that forward a little bit better view. So there's the glaciers in each of these little fingers of the extended hand that I was mentioning. See, I'm kind of coming down. You can imagine being a rock climber, it's like tons and tons of cool options to go and choose from. All right, get ourselves situated back here. Let me show you a picture of what that looks like. And I'll actually post, so there's a really cool YouTube video about caribou, which is from the Alaska Game and Wildlife. I think it's Game and Wildlife something. I'm missing the last word on there. And I'll post that in the Discord afterwards. It's absolutely worth a watch. I couldn't find a video that was something I could show here, and I don't want to show one that's not Creative Commons. So yeah, beautiful environment. It really is. Okay, let me show this. So this is kind of what it means. The caribou will gather on these patches of snow, and what the video talks about is how they actually count caribou. And what they do is they wait for days when it's really hot, and so they want to be on the snow, when it's not very windy, and so the mosquitoes are really bad, and all the caribou will then clump together on these snow patches, and so to count them, you can just fly over and take pictures of the snow patches and then count them afterwards. And there's some cool planes in there too, and some other stuff. So it's a good video for nature lovers and plane enthusiasts alike. So in summary, hold on. Yes, these mountains are really cool in the game. Yeah, they are really cool. And they go on and on. Just, yeah. Which is Alaska. That's Alaska for you. So. Okay. So caribou are critical keystone species in Alaska. They migrate enormous distances every year. They provide key sustenance to native people. Both males and females grow antlers. And their bodies are adept to the cold, and like me, they do their best to avoid mosquitoes. So, if nothing else about caribou, remember this. When you or your partner are frustrated because you're shedding hair, or your partner's shedding hair, or your dog's shedding hair, at least it's just hair, right? And it's not like this terrible 1-2 combo of a velvet piece of fur that falls off, and then later antlers. What a nightmare, right? It's like year after year, just another darn pair of antlers. In my soul, I can feel that wasn't a very good joke, so it's fine. But we'll make do. Okay, oops. And I didn't switch out of the live stream. Oh, thank you, Hannah. Yep, that's okay. All's well, all's well. Thank you, Fractals. So perfect timing with that. So the next topic we'll talk about today is oil and petroleum in particular. And let me show you why real quick. So if we zoom out on here, I run the risk of forgetting to flip back again. The Gates of the Arctic National Preserve is over here. The Petroleum Reserve of Alaska, the National Petroleum Reserve of Alaska, touches up against the park here, and then it extends for much of this kind of northwestern part of Alaska. And I'll get a map that shows kind of that whole thing. So that's why we're talking about petroleum today, is because there's this big national preserve that's just to our northwest. So where does natural petroleum come from? It's just another stage of the natural oil cycle, much like rivers are part of the water cycle. Or is it landowners can wish it into existence if they just believe hard enough? Or it's formed when large quantities of dead organisms, mostly zooplankton and algae, are buried under rocks and subjected to intense, but not too intense, heat and pressure. Tried to bail you out from that horrible joke. I felt it, Fractals. I appreciated that. I was telling my wife just beforehand, because, like, you know, you do your best, right? But I was telling her just beforehand, I'm like, I don't know about these jokes, but I just couldn't think of anything better this week, so it's fine. It's fine. I appreciate it, Fractals. Maybe what we should do is we'll have like a plan B, something like throw up a funny, I don't know what, funny GIF or something. Okay. And what is it? I just flew in from Alaska and boy are my arms tired. Anyway, okay. So what kind of oil are we talking about? We're talking about petroleum in particular. So not like vegetable oil or anything like that. Petroleum. Oops, let's see if this loads. It looks like that. Okay. Also, it's also called crude oil or just oil. It's a naturally occurring yellowish-black liquid found in geological formations beneath the Earth's surface. It is commonly refined into various types of fuels. It consists of naturally occurring hydrocarbons, we'll talk a lot more about hydrocarbons in a minute, of various molecular weights and may contain miscellaneous organic compounds. The name petroleum covers both naturally occurring, unprocessed crude oil and petroleum products that are made up from refined crude oil. Talk a little about refining too. Once extracted, oil is refined and separated, most easily by distillation, into numerous products for direct use or for manufacturing, including gasoline, diesel, kerosene, asphalt, and chemical reagents used to make plastics, pesticides, and pharmaceuticals. Pull myself back on track here. Flying Singer, maybe your plane might have been the right choice here. I was able to get it all trimmed up when I was practicing, but boy, is she unruly. All right, straw poll results. What are we looking at? All 3 votes, okay, for form of large quantities of dead organisms, zooplankton and algae are buried in a rock and subject to intense heat and pressure. So that is correct. And the image I had in my mind was always sort of like dinosaurs die and turn into oil, which is sort of okay, but like in reality, it's mostly zooplankton and algae. So I think like it used to be the bottom of the ocean where all the algae died. That's where it would come from. Speaking of oil and oil refinery, there was an oil refinery near me when I was growing up that I used to pass and has all these like gizmos and gadgets going on that I, until like this week, didn't really understand what they were doing. Has anyone in the chat ever got to tour an oil refinery or I don't know, worked at one or anything kind of interesting like that? Fractals maybe has an uncle that does that. I'd be very curious to know, or an oil well. Any of that kind of experience seems like a very, very interesting one. I would love to hear kind of if there's anything you picked up there that was particularly interesting. So okay, so what is oil then? What is this petroleum? It's a hydrocarbon chains of various lengths, including things like octane. And I'll point out something in this. So octane, oct meaning 8 carbons in this chain. So you'll see there's 8 here. So I'll mention like a certain number of carbons in a chain. The number of carbons has a big influence on what kind of product you get out of it. And I'll talk about that in just a second. My gymnastics teacher's brother worked at the plant we grew up by, and we toured it. Oh, you did. Gymnastics teacher. Was it cool? In my imagination, it was always like the Wizard of Oz, sort of like, they go to the Green Palace and it's got the like it's always felt like it's some sort of thing like that. When in reality, I have to imagine it's very industrial. All right, and I'm gonna actually pause this real quick, and I'm gonna zip the plane ahead a little bit because we got quite a few miles and about 15 minutes remaining. Miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. Okay, here we go. So this is a famous valley that we're going to be flying in. Pop out here. Fractals, I'm convinced you know someone in every possible field of FHD characters. uh, so I mentioned it's made of hydrocarbon chains. We had octane I just showed. You can also get things from pentane through octane, and which is a 5-carbon pentane through octane, 8-carbon, and those will get refined into gasoline. You can also get ones from nonane to hexadecane, which would be 9-carbon to 16-carbon, and those will get turned into diesel, kerosene, jet fuel. You can also get ones that are 16 carbon atoms, more than 16 carbon atoms, and those can be refined into fuel oil or lubricating oil. Then at the heavier end of the range, you can get paraffin wax, which has approximately 25 carbon atoms. And then you can also get up to, when you get to like 35 or more carbons, you can get asphalt. And for those of you who were here last week, you may remember we talked about pitch and that sort of viscosity experiment they're doing. So this is that material that is asphalt, has the same thing. So it's very, very viscous. It's got the 35 plus carbons in the chain. Okay, so typically though, if you get up to 35 carbons, what they want to do is break it into smaller carbons to make it a little bit more valuable, because asphalt isn't as valuable as like gasoline. And so they'll use a process that actually takes these different chains of various length, and then they'll crack it up and make it into smaller chains. And that process will happen at a refinery. And so a unit to do that would look something like this. And so when Fractals went and toured, he may have seen this sort of structure. And that's the thing that would then go and crack it into smaller length chains. Very industrial, nothing exciting. Very industrial, nothing exciting to report back on. It smelled real bad at some point, so yeah, I believe it. I believe it smelled probably really rough. Yeah, little Robert Frost. Gotta have your interludes, right? So the shortest molecules, those with 4 or fewer carbon chains. So remember, pentane was something that would get turned into gasoline, a 5-carbon chain. It's got 4 or fewer, then they're gaseous when at room temperature. So these are petroleum gases then. And depending on demand and cost of recovery, there's a couple things they can do with them. They can try and capture them and sell them off as like a liquefied petroleum. They can also flare them off. So if you ever drive through parts of the country that have a lot of oil mining going on, you might see that fire at the top. So that's burning off those petroleum gases, those shorter than 5 carbon chains that aren't worth keeping around. And then the last piece that you might see is they could use it to power the refinery's own burners. So they could use it as just a resource that they have within the refinery. Let me pop out of the plane here. So this is a little airport, actually. It's kind of a fun one to land at. We won't go there today. This is right in the middle of the Gates of the Arctic Park. Swing around here. We're on our way to the actual Gates of the Arctic next. So like I mentioned, if it's 4-carbon, 3-carbon chain, then it's not going to produce gasoline, and so you have to decide if they want to keep it. If it's a 4-carbon chain, that becomes butane, and so you might use that for like a lighter or something like that. And 3-carbon then is propane, excuse me. So if you have like a propane tank, propane gas, that would be where that comes from. Same sort of set of carbons, just that's a 3-carbon chain, whereas gasoline would be more carbons, 5 to 8. So like I mentioned, oil itself comes from zooplankton or other organic compounds that are underneath sedimentary rock and then subjected to both intense heat and pressure. There's a handful of conditions that need to exist, though, and this is why, while it's plentiful, it's not everywhere. And in particular, what you need is a rich source rock, rich in hydrocarbon material, and then it's got to be put under pressure. And so it sort of looks like this. So the red area is that first piece that I'm talking about. They need a porous, permeable reservoir where it can accumulate. So that's actually the red piece here is that place where it accumulates. You need some cap rock, a seal on top, which is the green layer here. And that seal then prevents it from escaping to the surface. So if there wasn't something like slate or some other rock that's going to hold it in, then it would escape up. And then last is just whatever's underneath it. It doesn't matter as much because it's trapped on the part here, but it can be pushed up either water or other kind of rock down here. And then when it goes through that kind of pressure, that piece then, that part of it gets turned into oil, and you can go in and mine and pump it out. So propane and propane accessories, Bobby. Yeah, I had that stuck in my head all week. Yeah, I feel like we probably grew up on the same sort of show. Actually, that was when I realized. I was like, oh, it makes sense that they're all sort of in the same realms, all sort of fuels. Just hadn't put that together. Okay, so I mentioned that it collects in that reservoir, and so if you want to access the oil, all you really need to do for a lot of them is just drill a hole. And so you drill a hole, and it takes a shape like this, and you'll see this shape in another photo. So you get these sort of outer casings all the way down to an inner, and then there's your bottom of the hole. And then you build something to pump the oil out with. And so if you see something like this out in wherever you're driving around, this would be an oil pump. And so all they're doing then is that reservoir that we looked at, just pulling out all of the liquid oil there. Some reservoirs, like those in the Middle East, do have enough natural pressure that they actually don't need a pump to pump the oil out. It'll just pop out of the ground, which I had heard of happening, but it does sound like a magical moment if you were hoping to find oil. The natural pressure in most reservoirs, though, will dissipate over time, and so typically you need to do some sort of artificial lift, which would be like a pump or something else. That kind of method, though, that pumping, becomes less efficient over time, that primary method it's called, and so you start to have to switch to secondary methods. Common secondary method would be a water flood, where they inject water into the reservoir to increase pressure and force it up. They can also do something tertiary or enhanced oil recovery methods, which would be like your third wave of approaches. You could do something like injecting steam. Instead of water, you'd throw in something like this. So you have your pump over here, your steam injector, and then that pushes all the oil over to the pump, and you can actually get it out. So you have a couple different options you want to get out there. This is when you start to get into getting the last pieces of oil through, that's when it starts to get a little bit more environmentally dicey. About 40% of the oil produced on a daily basis in the US comes from the primary production methods, so 40%. Secondary methods are about half, and then tertiary is about the remaining 10% or so. Secondary methods about half of the oil that the US produces. Let me see, how are we doing on time? We've got about 5 minutes left here, so let me see what piece I want to talk about. Let's talk about a little bit about why oil is good. I'll talk a little bit why oil is bad. So it's good because it has a high energy density, which is the amount of energy stored per region of space or unit of volume. It's easily transportable and relatively abundant. And so because it's got that high energy density, you can transport it pretty well, and it's relatively abundant. It becomes a really good source of the fuel for different purposes where you need energy to drive it. And this then made it one of the most important sources of energy since the mid-1950s. It really took off. Petroleum is used in manufacturing a wide variety of materials, and it estimates that the world consumes about 1 million barrels each day. Petroleum production can be extremely profitable and has been an important economic development for the 20th century of some countries, so-called oil states, and gaining significant economic and international power because of their oil production. You may have heard of that sort of oil state setup. So that's the good part, is it's actually a really good material for doing what it needs to do, that ability to store a lot of energy and transport easily. Why is it bad, though? So it's bad because it has a lot of negative environmental and social consequences. Most significantly, the petroleum industry is one of the major contributors to climate change. Parts of the petroleum industry's activity, this is sort of the shady stuff that you may have heard of, but it's, things like suppressing science and policy aimed at preventing climate crisis. There's other negative environmental impacts of exploitation of petroleum reserves. So you get oil spills, you may have heard of, you get air and water pollution at the sites of utilization and things like that. There's other issues that arise depending on the types of method you're using for extraction. We talk a little bit about that. I suspect we won't have time, but there's way more than we can cover here on pros and cons. Obviously, everything has an upside and a downside to it. So what does the future then look like for oil? Consumption of oil is about $100 million per day, or 100 million barrels, per day. And at that rate, we can keep going for about 120 years with the oil we have on Earth if we want to go and pull it all out. More recent studies, though, say it's about 50 years, so somewhere between 120 and 50 years. Let me see. So the Middle East are Beverly Hillbillies. Nice. Nice fractals. All right, looks like we're going to hit our gates of the Arctic view just on schedule here. The last piece I wanted to mention is how it relates to the park. So I mentioned that there's that huge oil reserve. So here's this. This is where that is. I mentioned it's a large part of the upper part of Alaska. I'll show you like just the small chunk that we're flying over here. This is the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, or NPRA, and it's also the largest tract of undisturbed public land in the United States. They estimate it contains about 896 million barrels of conventional undiscovered oil. The other piece of the park, or nearby the park, is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. So this runs through this part of Alaska. And this is the pipeline that you may have heard of. It looks like this. So people say the Alaska Pipeline. This is it. When I was researching this, there's a lot to the pipeline, as you can imagine. There's a lot of very interesting social elements. There's a lot of interesting engineering elements. There's a lot of interesting political elements. We don't have time to get into all of them, but if you want a really, really interesting topic to dive into, oil is definitely one to go for. All right, so in summary, petroleum is a naturally occurring but limited resource with a high energy density. It is sometimes easy to extract and sometimes requires very specific tools and processes. After the oil is processed, it is used for everything from gasoline to reagents for making plastic. The U.S. has a large national petroleum reserve in Alaska. For this topic, I won't make a joke. It's well known that the environmental impacts of oil are severe, and with new and more aggressive techniques needed nowadays, it's becoming increasingly risky for the Earth. So the good news is the problem we can solve. We know why oil is so valuable, right? It's the high energy density, ease of transportation, and relative abundance. And so all we need to do is continue exploring and find something that has those same three characteristics, right? High energy density, ease of transportation, relative abundance. And with that kind of replacement, then we're able to actually move away from oil as something that we need. So I guess that's sort of a reminder to, when we talk about exploring in the physical sense, I mean it for the parks, but I also mean with topics like this, it's that kind of thinking outside the box to solve something that otherwise may be hurting the Earth and these national parks. All right, so I paused here real quick. This is the gates of the Arctic view. So we have one gate on the right and one gate on the left. I'll draw myself down actually in the valley. You can see what he saw. So this is Bob Marshall when he was walking around here, flying off into the gates of the Arctic. All right, I'll finish off here then flying through. Fractals, do you want to post up the next national park? And while people are voting on that, so we have 3 national parks as options for next week. So there's the Mesa Verde National Park, Petrified Forest National Park, and Capitol Reef National Park. Thank you very much, Fractals. So today we talked about the gates of the Arctic National Park, talked a little bit about Bob Marshall and the wilderness that he helped found. We talked about caribou, talked about their antlers quite a bit, and their cold adaptations, which I wish I had. And then we talked about oil, petroleum, talked about some of the pros and cons with it and how it's used and why it's good for that sort of thing. Fractal just posted up a survey and Twitter and Discord links. Love if you want to come hang out in the Discord. Twitter is useful for getting announcements, and then I do use those surveys, so I appreciate all the input on them. Thank you very much. And let's see, with that, Fractals, we get enough votes in. Fractals, can you see how many people vote? Like, are you able to know when you get a sufficient amount, or is that something you just kind of guess? Do a little drum roll. There's this wild lake on the end here, which has a couple of houses on it. It seems like an amazing place to just have a summer home. Petrified Forest National Park. All right. 3 votes for Petrified Forest National Park. And there we will head next week. This will be fun. This is a good park. So I'm excited. We'll explore that next week. You can see the results after you vote. Oh, okay, cool. Neat. Okay, so yeah, with that, thank you all for being my co-pilot today. Until we meet again, keep on exploring. And I'll see you all next week. Also, the music at the beginning was from Howard Harper Burns, and I will play a little outro music by him as well. So if you enjoyed it, you can keep listening. But that'll be the end for the stream today. So thank you all. See you next week.